My next guest is Jason Furman, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama, and now an economist at Harvard. I sat down with him recently. Let's take a listen. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today. I know there's a lot of questions we all have about the economy, so I'm going to jump right into it. Inflation fell a little bit in April, but it's still near 40-year highs. And, we still saw the prices of food, healthcare, transportation continue to increase. What needs to happen for inflation to start coming down in a way that families will actually start to feel?
Look, I think there's some ways that it might already be coming down that families will feel, which is the price of gasoline is likely to fall. The headline inflation number, the 8.3, is boosted by some genuine transitory factors. The problem is that underlying it, there's still a lot of inflation that isn't transitory.
So speaking about the inflation that isn't transitory, there was an expectation among a lot of economists last year that some of the pandemic-related reasons that prices were going higher, the shortages that we all remember, supply chain disruptions and delays, those would fade, but that hasn't really happened yet. And I was wondering if, maybe policymakers made a mistake by anticipating those pressures to go away before they actually did.
Yeah, look, I think policymakers last year had a good list of reasons why inflation might go down, but then no list of reasons why it might go up. And so they're living in a world where if everything goes perfectly, here's why inflation will fall. Not everything went perfectly. In fact, some things went quite badly. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is tragic for many reasons, but has also raised US inflation. But look, things like, for example, last year people said, oh, all the inflation is in goods. If the goods inflation goes away, then inflation will go away. Well, the goods inflation has gone away, but now we have services inflation. And so you can't just assume, some bad things are going away without thinking, oh, wait, maybe some other shoes will drop and that'll take things the other way.
And why is it that services are, getting a lot more expensive now? As you mentioned before, earlier, in 2021, most of the inflation we saw was in manufactured goods that were, either held up in supply chains or relied on things like computer chips that were in short supply. Why have we seen the prices of, basic goods and services increase so quickly over the past year?
So services are largely produced by labor. The main cost of producing services is wages, and wages are rising very quickly. And so services is where you most clearly see the wage price. It's sometimes called spiral. I like to call it wage price persistence story taking place. The other thing is a big part of services is the cost of housing. And we've seen the huge increase in house prices, the huge increase in rents that's finally starting to show up in the government statistics too.
And when it comes to tackling these sources of inflation, obviously the Federal Reserve is kind of the front line of the inflation fight. The Fed has raised their interest rate range by 3/4 of a percentage point already, and that's likely to keep going up. But there's, broad agreement, even among Fed officials now, that they waited too long to begin raising rates. At this point, can the Fed still curb inflation without causing a recession?
I don't know. I think it's worth trying. I think we might get lucky. I didn't expect all the positive stories to break in the optimistic way people thought last year. I still am not that optimistic, but I think it's worth trying. And that's basically what the Fed is doing now. They're trying to bring rates to neutral and hoping the inflation goes away. I think that's a reasonable strategy. It probably is not going to work, but can revisit it 6 months from now, 9 months from now, if it doesn't work.
And speaking of, whether or not that works, there's, obviously a lot of discussion about the Fed trying to achieve a soft landing, which is interpreted as interest rates are elevated, but inflation goes down and the economy holds up pretty well, versus a hard landing, which, generally seems to mean, interest rates go higher, but not without the economy taking a pretty serious hit. What do you think needs to happen in the economy for the Fed to be able to get to a point where inflation starts to go down, but the economy is still holding somewhat strong?
That's a tricky question because we don't have many examples of it. In fact, we may not have any examples of it. It is possible that this is all some weirdness due to the pandemic. And as the things normalize vis-a-vis the pandemic, although what exactly the new normal will be is anyone's guess, that the inflation will go away. That's possible. Historically, that's not what's happened. It's required a deep recession to bring inflation down by a meaningful amount. And historically, there's not a lot of other tools the Fed has other than causing a deep recession.
And when it comes to how well equipped the economy might be for this, inflation has obviously been quite high for a while, but the unemployment rate's at 3.6%, which is just a tenth of a percentage point above where it was before the pandemic. And a lot of other measures of the economy, consumer spending has been pretty resilient. How much of a comfort is this to you as the US gets into this hairy period where we're looking at higher recession risk and higher interest rates?
Look, a recession is always a possibility in any economy. I'm not unusually worried about a recession over the next year. Consumer spending remains very high. Businesses are still rebuilding their inventories. There's more workers who are still coming in from the sidelines back into the labor force and into the job market. So, while there's definitely a bunch of risks and a bunch of problems out there, I'm more worried at sort of a horizon of 1 to 2 years than I am at the horizon of 0 to 1 year.
And speaking of the economic outlook, looking a little bit broadlier too, the US is not the only country dealing with high inflation right now, but the US economy seems to be far better than a lot of other countries that, are also dealing with this inflation, given, the speed of our recovery. What went right in America that, has not helped other economies recover as quickly as we have?
Yeah, look, by any stretch, the recovery has been fast everywhere in the world. It's been faster in the United States. By any measure, inflation has been high everywhere in the world, but it's been higher in the United States. And those two facts are related. We did a much bigger policy response. We got more GDP. We got more inflation. You can debate the relative magnitudes of the two. I think we did too much and got the wrong end of the bargain. But definitely, I think we got more of both.
And, when it comes to how we get out of the situation too, in terms of the inflation, we've talked a little bit about what the Fed can do, but there's also intense political pressure on the Biden administration to try to tackle these prices. And the fact that they're going up so quickly. There's been a few different proposals released by Democrats, most of which, targeting corporations, maybe trying to prevent them from raising their prices too quickly or imposing taxes to counteract that. How effective would any of those strategies be at fighting inflation? And is there anything the Biden administration could do to help bring down price pressures?
There's not a lot that the Biden administration can do. They've done many of the things they can do in terms of addressing the supply side of the economy, trying to help out with ports and getting truckers on the road and the like. I think there's a little bit more they could do, of which dropping the Trump China tariffs are the biggest tool, but that itself wouldn't make a huge difference. The congressional legislation on effectively price controls would be really damaging to the economy. Historically, price controls don't actually help inflation very much. People maybe try to raise prices a lot before the legislation comes in, or maybe temporarily don't raise them so much, but then raise them a lot whenever the legislation ends. So price controls we've tried before. They're a route to large-scale shortages, and they don't solve the problem. Look, it's painful to say, but in some individual markets, the best cure for high prices is high prices. That's what will elicit additional supply. That's what will solve the problem. You try to get in the way of that, and you're just going to create more problems for yourself and more shortages.
Sure. Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. That's unfortunately all the time we have, but I really appreciate you taking some time to help us understand this complex economy.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our program. A big thank you to the American Bankers Association for all its support, and to all you attendees for joining us for this discussion. For those of you who missed any of the conversations, we will have video up from the event on our website shortly. I'm Sylvan Lane. Stay safe.